Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. So, with British manufacturing plants facing closure after closure as a result of Brexit, it's the car manufacturing industry that has been most notably hit. There are a number of aspects to this which I'll be discussing in this video, but the question I want to ask is if the Ford closure at Bridgend was Brexit related. Now, of all the car plants to announce closures, this is the one where there might have been reasons to suppose that maybe it was actually due to other factors. Spoiler alert though, it is actually Brexit related, and I'm going to explain why. So first of all, we need to understand the specific reasons why car manufacturing is being hit so badly in the UK. The UK has been seen as a good place to base operations due to being part of the EU and therefore free to trade within the bloc, but also having the lightest regulations for businesses. It was a combination that has seen lots of car manufacturing in the country when we don't really have much in the way of British car manufacturing going on. But many of the parts used to build the cars still come from factories in other EU countries. After Brexit, and with the trade deal having looked impossible as soon as the Conservatives announced their red lines, it became obvious that these would be subject to quotas and tariffs as a result of the WTO rules. Of course, when it comes to importing, the UK government has the right to reduce those tariffs to zero if they like, but that would hurt British-based manufacturers of car parts. But when it comes to selling the cars, many of them are destined for other parts of Europe. Now, these would certainly be subject to quotas and tariffs, which would make them uncompetitively expensive. The gains made by lighter regulations in the UK would be more than swallowed up by the extra costs and quotas. Much better to build them elsewhere in the EU or even now in Asia, now that Japan and Singapore have got a free trade deal agreed, than in the UK. And this was known about for a long time. So Sir Patrick Minford, he's the government's chief economic advisor. And this guy has been advising Conservative governments since Thatcher's days. And bear in mind what that means. He's not just an economist throwing his views out there. He's specifically paid by the Conservatives to advise them. And do you think they're going to pay someone for that length of time to advise them and then ignore exactly what he says? No, he's someone they're going to listen to. Doesn't mean they'll do exactly what he says every time, but they are listening and surely act on that advice most of the time, otherwise why keep him? Now, he was filmed in the Commons last year saying that British car manufacturing industry would be wiped out by Brexit, and he further said that ministers should do nothing to save it, says there's no point, that it's right to allow that industry to completely collapse. Now, although I can't be sure, I'd be fairly confident he said the same about other manufacturing industries as well being hit by Brexit. And so it has played out. Car manufacturers have been increasingly announcing the closure of their plants over the past half year, and production was slowed by 45% in April this year because that was the month after we were supposed to have left. You know, the expectation is that we would have left the EU by now and so wouldn't have been able to sell as many cars. So without even having left and still uncertainty over whether we ever will, the manufacturers had to base their decision making on what the government was saying. And the government was saying we're going to be gone by March the 29th. But what about Ford? So on the face of it, there are a number of factors which might explain the closure that are not Brexit related. And it's not like factories never closed down in the UK before 2016. So, you know, these things can happen. But it's not quite as simple as Anne Widdecombe dismissing it by saying, well, factories close down all the time. No, they don't. Every now and then a manufacturing plant closes down. At the end of the day, we mostly elect Conservative governments. Conservative governments do not support British manufacturing in the same way that other EU governments do with theirs. You know, I always think it's a bit like being a wealthy football club in the Premier League, used to buying star players rather than developing the homegrown talent, but it's made us reliant on other nations and rendered our national team a laughingstock. But away from the football analogies, the sheer scale of closures in the space of time is unprecedented. There wasn't even quite this much carnage under Thatcher. But let's go through some of the reasons why you might imagine Ford is really a non-Brexit closure. So, one, it's an American company and their boss is threatening unfavourable action for US manufacturers who don't base their production in the States. So are Ford talking about shifting their production to the United States? No. They're saying they might base it in Mexico instead. So the American first, Trump's banner, isn't a factor in this. So it's not that they're going to relocate to the United States. They're going to relocate to Mexico. Second, they've also closed down another plant in continental Europe as well. Well, so if they're closing down a plant in the UK, but also in a committed EU member, well, then it can't be Brexit related, can it? Well, so you might imagine at first. It's not a ridiculous conclusion to come to. But it turns out that the plant in question sells cars to the UK. Now, just because the UK makes a lot of cars, don't imagine that we satisfy our own consumption. Just as there are lots of cars in the UK that are going to be sold abroad, there are also cars made in other EU countries that are going to be sold in the UK. Just down the road from me are the dock towns of Grimsby and Immingham. I've lived in both of those towns at various points. You get quite heroic quantities of cars coming in from abroad that are then distributed throughout the rest of the UK. So with the plant in question producing cars for the UK market, Brexit would mean that they would suddenly become uncompetitive. Remember, Brexit does hurt businesses outside of the UK as well as in the UK. Third, Ford said the closure had nothing to do with Brexit. At least that's what they said last week. It's not what they were saying in 2016. It's odd in many ways that everyone is behaving as if this closure came straight out of the blue. Well, apart from the fact there's been so many car manufacturers announcing closures of their plants, the idea that another one where there's an announcement of a closure coming out of the blue is ridiculous. Like, are you not paying attention to what's going on in your industry? But forget about that. Ford announced in 2016, after the referendum, that Brexit would mean taking a $1 billion hit and that it is likely to mean plant closures. In fact, they said it would mean plant closures. So the reasons why car manufacturing in the UK can't survive Brexit are understood. We know that Conservative governments listen to an advisor who recommends allowing the entire industry to disappear in this country. And we also have Ford themselves saying, as soon as Brexit was announced, and that was at a time when you might have imagined we'd at least get a trade deal with the EU, that they'd be closing down production. And so, yes, the Ford closure is Brexit related. And we have a government that is expecting all plants to close. And if the government is expecting it, then the workers and unions should be expecting it too. And stop feigning surprise when the next one is announced. And there's another sting in the tail as well. The announcement of the closure of the Ford plant at Bridgend means the loss of 1,700 jobs, plus a number of others in the supply chain. I don't know how many in this case. Now, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, Ford says that will cost a further 6,000 jobs, as they'd pretty much have to shut up shop in the UK. So even trying to suggest that Brexit isn't responsible for the 1,700 lost jobs, which we know not to be true based on what they previously said, as well as any other factors, the only type of Brexit that the Brexiteers are now saying is worthy of the name will definitely be labelled as the reason for 4 times as many jobs again going. So there we go. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.